All right, so today I want to briefly talk about bias questioning, bias sampling, and just how a question or a statistical question could have bias. I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about the Yankees. I'm going to talk about King George III. I'm going to talk about Twilight. Um, Seemed like an odd combo, but here we go. So, bias sampling. What is bias? Bias is when there's a preference for one thing over another. Just generally, if you have a bias for, I don't know, vanilla over chocolate ice cream, you have a bias. So if someone came to you and is like, hey, do you want vanilla or chocolate? You're going to say vanilla. That's not even a question. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Everybody has preferences. But you being biased and a question being biased are very totally different things. A statistical question can be biased if the setup, the situation, or the question favors one answer over other answers and kind of pushes or pulls the respondent to say one thing over other things. Now, there's some key flags to look for a question being biased. Does the question itself make it really clear that one answer is preferred over another? We're going to talk about an example of that later. Does the question use weighted or emotional language? Does the question itself make you feel like you really should answer one over the other? You're like, I'm gonna feel like a bad person if I don't answer that. Third one is about size. Were enough people sampled to draw conclusions? If you only sample like 3 people, that's not enough to get an accurate read on an entire larger population. And then furthermore, were the correct people sampled? If you are looking to only talk to one small specific group of people, but you're trying to apply that to the entire country or the entire state, that's not going to fly. That's considered biased. And then, like, the big picture is like, does the question line up with your goal? And if it doesn't, you have a problem. Big takeaways from this: does your sample pool and your question phrasing fairly allow your question to be answered? That key word is fairly. If it's not fair, you have bias at play. And then do the methods again fairly match the intent. If you're trying to draw conclusions about only people in South Carolina, sure, only ask people in South Carolina. If you're only trying to find out stuff about people who live in New York City, sure, only ask people who live in New York City. But if you're trying to draw conclusions about the entire country, you probably shouldn't just ask people in New York City. That doesn't make any sense. If you have any doubts, if the question makes you go, then the answer is probably no. So, example, let's say you wanted to do a research study on who people are going to vote for in the presidential election. You have this whole country to sample from. You have 50 states plus all the territories. It's wild how big our country is. But let's say you only decided to ask people in South Carolina. That would not be a good question. That would have a bias. People in South Carolina probably prefer one thing over another. They probably prefer one type of candidate over another. They probably have certain issues that they care about more than other things. They're not going to give you a good read on how the entire country's feeling as a whole. They're not going to have the same opinions as people in California or New York or Wyoming or Idaho or Texas. It's going to be a different game. So that's one thing. Now, let's take New York City example. Let's say you wanted to find out, okay, among New Yorkers, mind you, that is key. Among New Yorkers, who's their favorite sports team? Is it the Yankees or is it the Mets? That is a fair question because you're only asking New Yorkers and your goal is only New Yorkers. You're not trying to draw goals about the entire country. It's just New Yorkers. That's a fair question. Now let's say that was not your goal anymore. Let's say you want to determine what is the favorite baseball team of the United States. That's a huge and very different question. And you asked only New Yorkers if they preferred the Yankees or the Red Sox. Now, this is biased on many levels. First of all, you're only asking people from New York. You're going to get a very small sample size, and you're only going to get a very biased sample size. New Yorkers have preferences, obviously, for the Yankees or the Mets. On top of that, you've layered on there a historic baseball rivalry. That the Yankees and the Red Sox have some long beef going on, going back decades. So New Yorkers are probably almost universally going to say the Yankees in that particular case. That might lead you to conclude that the favorite baseball team of the United States is the Yankees, and that's just not true. So you can't necessarily do that. That's bias on two levels, both on the question and on the sample. But we're going to talk about the sampling bias. So, sampling bias. This is when you ask broad questions only one specific group, which already has a predisposition towards an answer. For example, asking a group of men how often they get their nails done, with an intent of determining how often all people get their nails done. There, of course, are men who get their nails done. I've gotten my nails done. It's a wonderful experience. However, I don't do it frequently. So, asking a group of men how often they get their nails done does not give you a good idea of how people in general get their nails done. A better question would be to ask, how often do men get their nails done, with the intent of determining how often men get their nails done. That issue there is all people. Another example, asking a group of New Yorkers how often they eat Southern food, with the intent of determining how popular Southern food is in the United States. Guess what? You're not asking people who live in the South how often they eat Southern food. That's a huge issue. New Yorkers, while I'm sure they enjoy Southern food, who doesn't, they probably don't eat it as frequently as people in Georgia or Mississippi. So that's going to be a huge problem there. Second way to get sampling bias is asking a specific group of people when you want to apply results to large populations. For example, only asking dog lovers what the best house pet is. Dog lovers are predisposed to say dogs. If you try to use that to apply to everybody, you're going to be having a bad time. Another one is asking enough people. If you only ask people who live on one street about a topic, you're only going to get that street's example. That's not enough people to give you a better idea. Now, bias questions themselves. This is King George III. He was the King of England when the United States decided to rebel. Let's say he wanted to ask his people, the British people, what they thought about King George. Sorry, not about King George, about George Washington, who was a leader of the American military movement, and also our first president. Now, if he asked his people what they thought about George Washington, there's a lot of ways to ask. What do you think about the American leader, George Washington? What do you think about the movement to secede in the American colonies? Those are fair questions. But instead he asked, how terrible is George Washington? Because he's used that word terrible, he's already set up what his answers are going to be. His people are going to have choices between terrible and very terrible. He's going to get a biased result from that. And as a result, he'll walk away from that study with data in hand saying, I have evidence that George Washington is a big, smelly, poopy face. And that's not going to be accurate because he asked a loaded question. His question itself had bias. Another situation. What if someone, let's just say Jacob, asked Bella who her favorite is, Bella or Jacob or Edward. Guess what? Jacob's standing right there. She's gonna say Jacob. So that would be a biased situation. You're setting up a certain answer based on the environment that you're asking it in. That also is bias. Okay. If you said, who do you like better, Jacob or Edward, it's gonna be a pretty clear answer which one she's gonna say, and she might flip back and forth. This is a dated reference. We all know how that worked out. So, bias questions in summary. If you're asking loaded questions, that's bad. Making it so one answer is obviously better than the other. For example, would you rather poke your eye out with a rusty nail or get $5,000? I think most people would pick the $5,000 option, unless they really like nails for some reason. And then asking leading questions. How dumb is the politician blank? That's a loaded question. You're adding emotional load, and you're leading them to a certain answer. Kind of like King George. And when should good pet owners take the animals to the vet? You're implying that if you're not a good pet owner, you don't take your animal to the vet, or if you don't take your animal to the vet, you're not a good pet owner. People are going to be more predisposed to saying, oh, all the time, because they want to be considered a good pet owner. There's that. That's all I got. If you have any questions about bias questions, just remember King George and his question about how terrible George Washington is. It'll make you laugh. Have a good one.